20 million dead, 21 million wounded, ancient empires shattered into dust, and the map of the modern world drawn entirely in blood. When we look back at the apocalypse that was the First World War, we imagine vast trenches, the relentless churn of artillery, and the suffocating horror of mustard gas. But the deadliest conflict human history had ever seen did not begin on a sprawling battlefield. It began on a sunny Sunday morning on a quiet street corner with a wrong turn and a single 24-year-old student holding a pocket-sized pistol. The fate of humanity did not pivot on the brilliant strategies of generals or the decrees of kings. It pivoted on a catastrophic failure of security, a series of bizarre coincidences, and the fatalistic determination of a teenager who had nothing left to lose. This is the anatomy of a murder, a meticulous deconstruction of the most consequential assassination in human history. To understand the trigger, we must first examine the powder keg. The year is 1914. Europe is a continent holding its breath. Beneath the gilded veneer of the Belle Epoque, a massive, interconnected web of secret treaties and military alliances has divided the great powers into two armed camps. On one side stands the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia. On the other, the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. The tension is palpable. The air is thick with imperial ambition, paranoid nationalism, and an industrial arms race that has stockpiled weapons on an unprecedented scale. The continent is dry tinder, waiting for a spark. And nowhere is that tinder drier than in the Balkans, a volatile region recently liberated from the declining Ottoman Empire, only to find itself caught in the suffocating grip of a new master, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. At the center of this geopolitical storm is our target, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir presumptive to the Austro-Hungarian throne. He is a man of profound contradictions. Autocratic and quick-tempered, he is largely unloved by his own uncle, Emperor Franz Joseph, and deeply unpopular among the Austrian elite. Yet, ironically, Franz Ferdinand is the one man trying to prevent a war. He recognizes that the empire is a fragile patchwork of ethnic groups ready to tear itself apart. His proposed solution is trialism, a political reform that would grant greater autonomy to the Slavic populations within the empire. But in the dark calculus of extremist politics, a reformer is far more dangerous than a tyrant. By threatening to make the Slavic subjects content under Austrian rule, Franz Ferdinand becomes the ultimate enemy to those who desire total liberation. In the shadows of Sarajevo, a clandestine network of radicalized youth is watching the Archduke's every move. They call themselves Young Bosnia. They are not professional soldiers or trained operatives. They are impoverished students, peasant sons and romantic idealists, drunk on banned literature and radical poetry. Among them is a frail, quiet 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip. Born into extreme poverty in rural Bosnia, Princip has survived the deaths of 6 of his siblings. His own body is slowly being consumed by skeletal tuberculosis. He is a young man acutely aware that he is living on borrowed time. For Princip and others like him, the assassination of tyrants is not just a political strategy, it is a sacred duty, a form of blood sacrifice to awaken the oppressed masses. He has no future, which makes him the perfect weapon. But passionate teenagers with grand ideals cannot ignite a global war on their own. They need resources, they need weapons, they need the Black Hand. Operating deep within the Serbian military is a highly secretive terrorist organization officially known as Unification or Death. It is commanded by Colonel Dragutin Dmitrievich, codenamed Apis, the formidable head of Serbian military intelligence. Apis is a mastermind of the shadows, a man who had already orchestrated the brutal assassination of his own king and queen a decade prior. When Apis learns that the Archduke plans to visit Sarajevo, he sees an opportunity to strike a fatal blow against the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Black Hand provides Princip and his cell with 4 Browning FN 1910 semi-automatic pistols, 6 crude percussion grenades, and suicide pills. The journey from the Serbian capital of Belgrade to the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo is a masterclass in clandestine smuggling. Princip and his 2 primary co-conspirators, Nedeljko Čabrinović and Trifko Grabeš, move like ghosts through the rugged terrain of the Balkans. They are passed from one safe house to another, aided by a sympathetic underground network of border guards, peasants, and schoolteachers. The weapons are hidden in custom-made boxes, strapped to bodies and concealed beneath floorboards. Throughout the grueling journey, the 3 young men are silent and brooding, fully aware that this is a one-way trip. The suicide pills they carry are a grim reminder of their final directive: complete the mission, bite the capsule, and take the secrets of the Black Hand to the grave. As the assassins slip into Sarajevo, the Austro-Hungarian authorities remain blissfully ignorant, blinded by their own arrogance. The warning signs are everywhere, flashing red, yet completely ignored. The Serbian Prime Minister, catching wind of the rogue operation, attempts to send a veiled diplomatic warning to Vienna. The message is painfully vague, and the Austrian finance minister dismisses it entirely. Even more catastrophic is the choice of the date. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's visit is scheduled for June 28th. To the Austrians, it is merely the anniversary of the Archduke's wedding. To the Serbs, it is Vidovdan, the most sacred day of national mourning, marking their historic defeat at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. To parade a foreign conqueror through the streets of Sarajevo on Vidovdan is not just a security risk, it is a profound, unforgivable insult. The morning of June 28th, 1914 breaks bright and clear. Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, the Duchess of Hohenberg, step off their specialized train at the edge of Sarajevo. This trip is a rare moment of joy for the couple. Because of strict imperial marriage laws regarding Sophie's lower noble status, she is normally forbidden from riding in the same carriage as her husband in Vienna. But here, acting in his capacity as a military commander, the rules are relaxed. For the first time in their public life, they can sit side by side. They step into a luxurious, open-topped, Graf and Stift double phaeton sports car. The roof is folded down to allow the crowds to see the royal couple. It is a decision made for public relations, but it effectively transforms the vehicle into a moving gallery for a marksman. The motorcade, consisting of 6 cars, begins its procession down the Apel Quay, a long, straight boulevard running parallel to the Miljacka River. Security is shockingly minimal. General Oskar Potirek, the governor of Bosnia, wants to present a peaceful, welcoming atmosphere. The military garrison is confined to their barracks. The route has been published in the local newspapers days in advance. Standing among the cheering crowds lining the Apel Quay are the 6 assassins. They are spaced out along the motorcade's route, creating a gauntlet of death. If one fails, the next will strike. Gavrilo Princip is positioned further down the route, blending into the civilian crowd, his hand resting in his pocket, wrapped tightly around the cold steel of the Browning pistol. The royal car approaches the first assassin, Mohammed Mehmed Basic. As the motorcade rolls past the first position, Mehmed Basic freezes. Whether overcome by fear or blocked by a policeman standing too close, he watches the car glide by without drawing his weapon. The gauntlet seems to be failing. But the second assassin, 19-year-old Nedeljko Čabrinović, does not hesitate. As the Archduke's car approaches the Kumuria Bridge, Čabrinović strikes the percussion cap of his grenade against a lamppost. The sharp crack draws the attention of the motorcade. He hurls the explosive directly at the open-topped car. In a split second of incredible reflexes, the Archduke raises his arm, deflecting the grenade. It bounces off the folded roof of the car and rolls beneath the vehicle trailing directly behind them. The explosion shatters the morning calm, tearing through the street and leaving a dozen spectators and 2 officers in the trailing car severely wounded. Chaos erupts. The air fills with thick, acrid smoke and the screams of the injured. Knowing his part is done, Chabrinovich acts on his final order. He swallows his cyanide pill and hurls himself over the embankment into the Miljacka River. But fate is remarkably cruel. The river, in the heat of summer, is only a few inches deep. Chabrinovich lands hard on the riverbed, breaking his fall, but not his neck. Worse, the cyanide provided by the Black Hand is expired. Instead of bringing a swift death, it merely induces violent vomiting. The furious crowd drags the retching assassin from the shallow water, beating him savagely as the authorities place him under arrest. The motorcade speeds away from the blast zone, leaving the remaining assassins, including Gavrilo Princip, standing helplessly in the crowd. The Archduke arrives at the Sarajevo town hall, his face flushed with a mixture of shock and violent rage. As the mayor begins his prepared speech of welcome, Franz Ferdinand interrupts him, shouting, "Mr. Mayor, I come here as your guest and you greet me with bombs? It is outrageous." However, after composing himself, the Archduke insists on altering the day's itinerary. He refuses to leave the city immediately, demanding instead to visit the wounded officers at the hospital. General Potiorek assures him that the streets are safe, dismissing the bombing as the isolated act of a single madman. It is a fatal miscalculation that will seal the doom of millions. The royal couple gets back into the open-topped Graf and Stift car. The decision is made to drive straight down the Apple Quay at high speed to avoid the narrow, winding streets of the city center. But in the chaos and adrenaline of the moment, a critical failure in communication occurs. No one informs the driver, Leopold Loika, of the change in plans. As the motorcade reaches the Latin Bridge, the lead car turns right onto Franz Josef Street, following the original published route. Loika, following the car ahead of him, turns the wheel. General Potiorek, sitting in the passenger seat, immediately realizes the error. He shouts at the driver, "What is this? This is the wrong way. We are supposed to go straight down the Apple Quay." Loika hits the brakes, bringing the heavy vehicle to a complete stop directly in front of a corner shop called Schiller's Delicatessen. He shifts the transmission into reverse, a clunky and slow process in early automobiles. The car stalls. By an act of staggering historical serendipity, standing less than 5 feet away on the sidewalk outside Schiller's Delicatessen is Gavrilo Princip. He had given up on the assassination after the failed bombing and stepped away to buy a sandwich. Now, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire has literally parked in front of him. Time slows to a crawl. Princip drops his sandwich, draws the Browning pistol from his coat pocket, steps toward the stalled vehicle, and raises the weapon. He turns his head away as he pulls the trigger. Twice. The crack of the pistol shots is swallowed by the noise of the crowd. Instantly, Princip turns the gun on himself, intending to end his life right there on the pavement. But before he can squeeze the trigger a third time, a bystander tackles him, wresting the weapon from his grip. Princip manages to bite down on his cyanide capsule, but just like Chabrinovich, the poison is degraded. He violently dry heaves as police officers and furious citizens swarm him. A police saber flashes through the air, striking Princip's arm and severing his nerve, causing him to drop the pistol completely. The architect of the 20th century's greatest catastrophe is violently pinned to the cobblestones, bleeding, vomiting, and staring at the retreating exhaust of the royal car. Inside the car, a chilling silence has fallen. General Podiorik looks back and sees both the Archduke and the Duchess sitting completely upright. For a fleeting second, it seems the assassin has missed, but as the car accelerates back onto the Appel Quay, a thin stream of blood shoots from the Archduke's mouth. The first bullet had passed through the door of the car, striking Sophie in the abdomen, severing her abdominal aorta. The second bullet struck Franz Ferdinand in the neck, piercing his jugular vein. Sophie collapses onto her husband's lap. The Archduke, his plumed helmet falling away, cries out in a weak, gurgling voice, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children." When a count in the car asks if he is in pain, the Archduke whispers, "It is nothing." He repeats it over and over, growing fainter. By the time the car reaches the governor's residence, they are both dead. In the dark, damp cells of the military prison, the interrogation begins. The Austrian investigators employ every tactic of psychological pressure and physical abuse to extract the truth from the captured assassins. But the young men of young Bosnia display a terrifying stoicism. They view their impending executions or slow deaths in prison not as a punishment, but as a glorious martyrdom. Princip, his body racked with pain and tuberculosis, refuses to name his handlers in Belgrade. He tells his interrogators with chilling calmness, "I am a Yugoslav nationalist, aiming for the unification of all Yugoslavs, and I do not care what form of state, but it must be freed from Austria." He sits in the shadows, entirely unaware of the diplomatic avalanche he has just triggered. The news of the assassination strikes the capitals of Europe like a seismic shockwave. The gears of the continent's massive alliance systems begin to turn, grinding with a terrible, unstoppable momentum. This period becomes known as the July Crisis. In Vienna, the military hawks see the perfect pretext to crush Serbia once and for all. But they need assurances. They turn to their powerful ally, Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II issues the infamous blank check, promising unconditional German support for whatever punitive action Austria-Hungary chooses to take against Serbia. Empowered by this backing, Vienna issues an ultimatum to Belgrade intentionally designed to be rejected, filled with demands that would effectively strip Serbia of its national sovereignty. When Serbia predictably rejects the most extreme terms of the ultimatum, the final domino falls. On July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the shots were fired in Sarajevo, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. The great powers are violently pulled into the abyss. Russia, portraying itself as the protector of the Slavs, mobilizes its massive army. Germany, honoring its alliance with Austria, declares war on Russia and subsequently on France. To bypass French defenses, German troops march through neutral Belgium, forcing the British Empire to enter the fray. Within weeks, the localized dispute in the Balkans transforms into a global inferno. Millions of young men enthusiastically board trains heading for the front lines, assured they will be home by Christmas. They will instead march into the meat grinders of the Somme, Verdun, and Passchendaele. Gavrilo Princip did not live to see the end of the war he started. Because he was 27 days shy of his 20th birthday at the time of the assassination, Austro-Hungarian law spared him the hangman's noose. He was sentenced to 20 years in the grim fortress of Theresienstadt. There, kept in solitary confinement in a darkened, freezing cell, his tuberculosis ravaged him. His arm was amputated due to bone decay. He died on April 28, 1918, weighing barely 80 pounds. Etched into the wall of his cell were the words, "Our ghosts will walk through Vienna and roam the palace, frightening the lords." 7 months later, the war finally ended. 4 empires were destroyed. The map of the Middle East was carved up. The harsh terms of the peace treaty sowed the seeds for an even darker, more devastating conflict 2 decades later. All of it
The trenches, the Holocaust, the nuclear age can trace its lineage back to a wrong turn in a summer morning in Sarajevo and a teenager waiting in the shadows.